with a vast array of experience and expertise, and the ladies go first. So we will have our first speaker that will just give you an overview. They will share a bit, about 10 minutes or so, on who they are, what they do. And then we would bring it all together. On each one of the tables, there is some index cards. If you have any question or comments you would like to make to any one of the panelists, you can just write it down. We'll collect it during the discussion, and I'll pose the questions to them. Try to group it together so we're not all asking the same question. Dr. Lisa Radix will be our first panelist to share. She's the co-chair of the Division of Nephrology, Dialysis, and Plasma Exchange at Jenny Sport Medical Center in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And nephrology is predominantly the study of kidney and kidney disease. You can see that she was the first to start a peritoneal dialysis program in her community. And over the last 12 years, she has served as the medical director of the 2 outpatient dialysis centers in Hopkinsville, and that I talked about a little bit earlier. Many experience. I'm going to jump. You can look at her bio, at least a brief summary of her bio in the program. But she's from the Carenage in St. George's. She, of course, did her undergrad, did training at Vanderbilt University, and also a graduate of St. George's University as well. I like her statement that says that she believes that anything she has achieved is through the grace of God and the love and support of her family, making these her greatest treasures. Please, would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Lisa Radix.
Good afternoon, and it's truly an honor to be part of this panel and to speak with you today. The areas I've been charged with addressing are healthcare with an emphasis on kidney disease and dialysis and the art of giving. Grenadians are an awesome people. We know that. But there is one way in which we're not all that unique. Every developing country in the world has a diaspora. And every diaspora is hard at work trying to improve the country and life back home. We are certainly not the first group to make this attempt. And for as long as we've been at it, we really should be further along. Therefore, we must ask ourselves, are our actions the best choices possible? Since we should start with the most important point, let's talk about prevention. Grenadians aren't known for being an interactive group, but I'm gonna risk it and ask for a show of hands. If any of you had a choice between never ever having a stroke and having a stroke, getting the best care possible, and making 100% recovery, which would you prefer? Which, show of hands, who would prefer to have a stroke? Okay, well this is an intelligent group. No matter how limited resources are, if any population is effectively educated on the importance of healthy living, we will greatly reduce spending on the management of diseases. Public awareness programs cannot be overemphasized, and the funds saved can be reassigned to other areas where they're needed. After all, if no one in Grenada ever had a heart attack, would it matter if we had 5 highly specialized cardiologists and a state-of-the-art cardiac institute? No, right? So, tip number 1. If the saltfish sauce you had at the last function was the best you ever tasted, there is too much salt in your diet. Having said all that, even with the best preventive measures, some people will still become ill and require medical attention. So the next line of defense should be quality management. This does not mean the latest treatment with the most expensive drug available. Rather, it means effective care with the least expensive regimen possible. It also means effective communication, proper documentation, screening for illnesses so management may begin earlier to prevent end organ damage, closing the loop on follow-up of labs, radiology results, pathology reports, and abnormal patient assessments, continuing medical and nursing education, following basic standards of care, root cause analysis, morbidity and mortality conferences, and peer review. Don't get me wrong, resources will be required, and much is needed. In that vein, the Ministry of Health has set up a donations desk to help iron out the wrinkles with getting items to Grenada. I believe the information is on the government website. And if anyone is interested, there are information cards at the back with the list. With the list that also includes contact data. While financial and material donations are great, one can also contribute in other very valuable ways. This includes, but isn't limited to, intellectual assistance, both remote and on-site. Also, we should consider creating a biomedical engineering team because we seem to have this continuous problem with equipment getting to Grenada and breaking down. In 6 months, 3 months is not functional anymore. So this would help us to repair and maintain equipment received either through donations or through purchase. This can be done with private enterprise or by government scholarship, or incentive. If the need at home isn't great enough to support a full-time team, we may want to regionalize our efforts. And we can regionalize our efforts in all areas. Other islands, more than likely, having similar problems, and there certainly is benefit in economies of scale. In keeping with the current theme of medical management, it's time for tip number 2. If you have diabetes and hypertension, and you aren't doing everything possible to keep them controlled, what you are actually saying is, dialysis looks like a bundle of fun, and you'd like to try it. So we've come to dialysis. At home, there are currently 12 or 13 patients receiving treatments. There were more than 10 new cases of kidney failure in 2014 alone. And while that may not seem to be a lot, the number of patients on dialysis and the number of dialysis centers throughout the region are steadily rising. Kidney failure is a very debilitating illness. It affects your ability to work and to enjoy the simple things of life. If you're on dialysis, it's even difficult to travel. But if you're a Grenadian, you're getting dialysis here, and you want to go home for a vacation or something, there are a couple of choices. If there are no contraindications, you can switch to the other type of dialysis, peritoneal dialysis. It's done by the patient, doesn't require a lot of equipment. You could do it at home, so you could do it here. You could do it in Grenada. You could consider being evaluated for a transplant, but that's a long-term solution because the wait time on the transplant list is about 3 to 5 years, depending on which state you live in. There are also cruises with dialysis on board that include Grenada among their ports of call. You can also purchase travel insurance, would be expensive for somebody on dialysis. And there's a small but functioning dialysis unit on the island. Of course, in that case, in most instances, you'd have to pay the cost out of pocket. So now we get to cost. Here in America, the average cost of hemodialysis is $89,000 a year, US. It's not only expensive, it's disproportionately expensive. By that I mean, dialysis patients on Medicare make up 1% of Medicare recipients, but they use 6% of the Medicare budget. And if you don't think that's a lot, it's about $30 billion. Therefore, we may not want to apply an American solution to this Grenadian problem. I don't have the answers, but we're here to think about things and discuss things critically, and maybe we can come up with some other solutions. One such solution is peritoneal dialysis that I spoke about. In America, it's 25% less expensive. Outside of America, that cost difference may be greater. Another option is if we're to believe the Kiplinger article in January of 2012, then spinal surgery, which costs $70,000 here, costs $4,700 in Thailand, and heart surgery, which costs $85,000 here, costs $18,000 in Taiwan. So we may want to look at international colleagues to assist us, look at what they're doing with a view to finding other ways, innovative ways to control not just the cost of dialysis, but the cost of healthcare. The issue of medical coverage extends beyond dialysis, as it prevents many active Grenadians from retiring on the island where they would be able to contribute in so many ways. Ultimately, the solution to this problem may only be achieved at the governmental level. Since 1998, companies in California have been able to purchase medical insurance to cover employees living in Mexico, and or employees who just prefer to receive their care in Mexico. Another organization, the Association of American Residents Abroad, has also taken up the challenge of multinational health coverage. Our local government representatives must clearly define their position on such issues before earning our vote. Non-governmental Grenadian organizations in the US can play a vital role by being the conduit between the diaspora and our US representatives. So as you can see, there is much to be done, and we should have a lot to talk about. Please get involved. You can make a difference. And, as Joe Kennedy said, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? I'm going to end here. Thanks for listening or being able to sleep with your eyes open. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Radix. Our next panelist is Dr. Roland, Royston, Purcell. Purcell was born in, and like I said, you can read his brief bio in the program. I'll just highlight a few key areas. Born in Purcell in the Netherlands Antilles, to immigrant Grenadian parents. Came back came to Grenada and returned to Grenada, where he attended the St. David's Roman Catholic School. He also went on to study Jamaica, where he did medicine at UWI, University of the West Indies. He also graduated from UWI, after graduating from University of the West Indies, he interned at Port of Spain in General Hospital in Trinidad, of course. And you can see that he has an extensive experience. He's a vascular surgeon, general surgeon, vascular surgery, training in Texas Heart Institute. He's board certified in general surgery, vascular surgery, surgical critical care, and emergency medicine. Immediate past president of the medical staff at the Interfaith Medical Center. He held that position from 2010 to 2014. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the podium Dr. Roland Purcell.
Good afternoon. On behalf of myself and my immediate extended family, I'd like to extend a personal gratitude to the organizing committee for inviting me to be here today to speak to you on some aspects of care in Grenada. I'd also like to extend my gratitude to my deceased parents and also the people who played a very key role in my growth, development, and taking me to where I am today, because this did not happen by the forces of gravity. As it says, it takes a village to raise a child. And so it's been a lot of important people in my life, including my deceased parents, Ermentrude and Francis Purcell, who I consider to be splendid and extremely dedicated parents. So with that short note, I will talk to you very briefly about what I consider to be the critical aspects of healthcare in Grenada. I would prefer not to give a very lengthy speech because I believe that it would be more productive if we have an enhanced and robust question and answer session as opposed to a lengthy didactic sessions, because you tend not to retain, it tends not to be very engaging. As we look at the problems of healthcare in Grenada, one of the things that we must always bear in mind is that you cannot separate healthcare from your level of socioeconomic development. The two are intertwined. And I would ask you to review the Singaporean experience, because Singapore in 1964 or 65, when it became independent, was until that time a British colony. We became independent a few years later on. But what we learned from Singapore was the parallel between Singapore's socioeconomic development and the development in healthcare. What is even more remarkable about Singapore is they have now moved from a third world country to a first world experience in healthcare. And so the Singaporean experience now mirrors the experience of some of the European countries and some of the more developed countries. And the way that they did it was to put in place a certain strategy that in many ways relied heavily on the rate and pace of sustainable economic development. Now, how does that relate to Grenada? You cannot plan for healthcare in a country without regard to what's happening to your economy. In other words, if we continue to have high prevailing rates of unemployment, it is difficult to entertain a system of healthcare delivery that could thrive, that could grow on high levels of unemployment. Secondly, we should not be thinking of a system that relies entirely on government funding and government financing. We have seen that those systems, they look attractive when you're told that there is no cost for X, Y, and Z for this service or that service. It sounds appealing, but in fact, it is not free. There's nothing that's free in this life. It takes somebody's effort and somebody's time to make that service or that product available to you. And so the question is, how do we get to this idea of financing healthcare? How do you pay for healthcare? To put a system in place to pay for healthcare, in my opinion, because of our population, because of our size, I think for us to be realistic in financing healthcare, the risk has to be spread over a much larger population. And you cannot confine it to people that are very sick. Because if you confine it to people that's very sick, what will happen? The system will collapse. Because the demand for care will be so high in that small population that you won't be able to build a sustainable system. So then you have to look at something that could be developed by the Eastern Caribbean states to finance healthcare, and maybe, if you're looking at it from the CARICOM perspective, to include all of CARICOM. And so you have a population of greater than 3 million, which is maybe bigger than the Singaporean population. So you have to look at the population. If you really want to build sustainable healthcare, of course, there would be political barriers to achieving that goal. There'll be political barriers, there'll be geographic barriers. We are all from Grenada. we understand what it means. If you try to do something with Trinidad, you know what's going to happen. If you try to do something with Jamaica, you know what's going to happen. But I believe that with the era that we're living right now, with the IT technology and the information infrastructure that's in place, it is my opinion that those barriers, if we can find the political will and the necessity to pursue that objective, it becomes more feasible and more doable. So what we will have then is a system to finance healthcare where the participants would involve the entire CARICOM region. And so that means that you have people contributing to an insurance pool that can create a system that's in itself financially self-sustaining. And that also, what that would do for you is that once you create such a system, it then would put in place quality measures. Because you can't put a system like that in place and not have quality measures, have not an administrative system to supervise, to manage, to run the operations of such a system. So your hospitals will have to meet certain performing standards, certain quality standards. There'll be much more rigorous review of mortalities, much more rigorous review of bad outcomes. That's what flows if you implement such a system. And you will have the resources of the entire CARICOM government to help you implement such a system. So I'm saying that the era when we relied entirely on the Ministry of Health to provide healthcare, to finance healthcare, I think that era is gone. I think we need to look for a new paradigm. I think we are at a point right now with our evolution and history where we ought to look for a new paradigm. And so what we should be looking at in our situation in the Caribbean is why I think the discussion that's coming from the Institute for Healthcare Improvement in this country, where they're talking about the 3 aims of healthcare, and that is where contemporary healthcare policy is today, and that is looking at the population health. And what is population health? Population health means very simply this. You target a specific group of people. And if you're looking, say, at diabetics, we know that there are ways to monitor diabetic patients to tell you whether or not the particular patient A or Y or Z is adequately controlled. This is a thing that's been very, very well established. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. What we need to do is to put a system in place where diabetics are very well managed. The targets and the goals and the metrics are already established. So the benefit of taking this robust approach to managing diabetics, what it means is that your rates of amputation will go down. Your rates of blindness will go down. Your rates of kidney failure will go down. So all the burden that's put on a system from chronic disease management gets alleviated because on the front end, you did the right thing, which is to manage diabetics properly. And I can tell you, it's not that difficult. And you can start from the health clinics where the nurses are involved, the community nurses are involved. They know what the metrics are. They know how to educate the patients as to what they need to look for, how to monitor the diabetes, and so you can achieve those goals. And the same goes for many other chronic diseases. Hypertension, the same thing. If you don't manage hypertension properly, we know what the consequences are. Strokes, heart attacks, heart failure. So when you get to heart failure, you're at the end of that spectrum, that continuum of disease. We all know what the consequences of heart failure is. The mortality rate, the death rate in 1 year is 24%. The death rate at 5 years is 50%. But even for heart failure patients, if you have a robust system in place, you can control the rates of hospitalization and you could decrease the mortality by proper management of the patients. I could keep going on and on, but I think I need to stop here because I made a commitment at the beginning that we should focus on an interactive session and they probably will be more productive than me lecturing and lecturing to you. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Purcell. I want to remind you that on each of your table, there is some index card. And there are pens, I believe, provided that look like this, thanks to TD Bank. Please, as the speaker is speaking and questions come to your mind, don't say, I'm going to write it down later on. While they're speaking, just jot it down. And then we'll collect them. There's some shovelers around that will pick those up. Some of the ushers around will pick it up, pick those index cards up, and they'll bring them to me, and we'll share them. So please, if you don't have them on your table, lift your hands and we'll try to get it to you. We focused a bit on medicine, but the environment has a key role in outcome, right? And we're from a small island. Some of you may be, I know they're not all Grenadians here, so they may be from other parts of the world or other parts of the Caribbean. But you will see our next speaker is Dr. Christopher Jeffrey, and he's a senior marine scientist at CSS Dynamac, and the on-site manager of workflow operations at the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, National Centers for Coastal Ocean Sciences in Silver Springs, Maryland. Quite a long spread, but that's good. Dr. Jeffrey holds his PhD in ecology and a Master of Science degree in conservation biology and sustainable development. Both from the University of Georgia. Over 20 years of experience. And you can see in coastal oceanic planning, marine ecological research, and geospatial analysis and developing sustainable approaches for managing coral reefs and fisheries. I just wanted to get a coral reef in. The rest you could read. The rest you could read for yourself. Of course, he's a native of Grenada, born in Grenada, of course. Grew up in St. Andrews as well as Gore, and he's a graduate of my alma mater, GBSS, Grenada Boys Secondary School. I can keep you some notes for this, sorry guys. But basically, he also taught biology at said school, GBSS, from 1983 to 1989. I'm delighted to have him here with us, traveling all the way from Maryland. Let's give it up for Dr. Christopher Jeffrey.
Good morning, everyone. First, let me say thank you to the organizing committee for inviting me to this, what I consider auspicious and prestigious occasion, and also I was able to bring my family along, so I thank them for coming here with me. It's rare that the environment is taken seriously at such functions. In fact, if you look at the history of the development of the world, you would see that almost every nation, as it ensures socioeconomic development, they never really cared about the environment at first. They raped, pillaged it, and developed their social and socioeconomic institutions. And as the environment deteriorated and the resources became limited, then they started paying attention to the environment. The U.S. is no different. Europe is no different if you've studied the history of European development. And so developing countries are no different. In fact, a lot of us, we left our homelands and our islands for a better life, right? That's why we came here, to get a better life. And the folks that stay at home, they're trying to get a better life too. So it's within their right to develop whatever resources they can at best to achieve that better life. But however, we know, as Dr. Purcell pointed out, and Dr. Radix pointed out, that the wellness of the people and the health of the people is intrinsically linked to its social development. And it's also linked to the environment in which that social development occurs. And so, small islands, they have it rough. They're limited by space because they're islands. They're surrounded by water. They have limited resources. And yet they desire all the wealth and goods that the rest of the world have. Whether it's technology, whether it's financial institutions, whether it's anything else. A cell phone, they want that. And so the conundrum becomes, how do you develop socially and economically to become a well-sustained country with limited resources without damaging your environment? And that's where my expertise comes in. Over the last 20 years, I've been advising governments in the U.S. Virgin Islands, in other U.S. territories, state governments in the U.S. about how better to develop socially and socioeconomically without damaging your environmental resources. So Grenada is no different from any of these places. Coming from an agrarian, agricultural background, we know that the land was important, and that's our history. But those of you who are farmers, and I grew up on a farm, you know that if you don't invest by fertilizing or planting or weeding, you don't get back a return on that investment. It's the same with the environment. If you don't invest in it, you don't put work into maintaining it, it'll deteriorate on you, and you won't have those natural resources to develop. A lot of you got today a bag that says Pure Grenada, and that's actually a great moniker for, I think that sets a tone for this endeavor and for the future that Grenada is going into. And I know the government, they're trying hard to market now the Grenada as a destination for eco-friendly tourism. And that's a very good thing. But we can't give it lip service. So one of the things that I think that a couple of things that could be done to help us realize a pure Grenada and actually achieve a goal of eco-friendly tourism, there are about 3 key things I think could be done without much investment, without much financial investment. Dr. Purcell referenced Singapore. I visited Singapore in 2000. And one of the things that struck me about Singapore is one of the cleanest places I ever saw in my life. You weren't allowed to spit on the ground or you would be put in jail. And that's sort of a dictatorial type of approach. But I was very impressed by how clean the island was. And it's an island. A clean island is readily marketable in today's world. Many of the tourists will pay high dollars to go to a clean place. That's something that could be put into Grenada without much investment if we're all clean. Litter, taking care of the litter on the streets. In November last year, I visited Grenada. And yes, they now have a solid waste division that's picking up refuse from all over the place and putting it in a central dump on the western side of the island, I believe. But there's still a lot of visible litter along the beaches. There are litter cans, but there's still litter along the beaches. So I think it behooves each one of us to help impress our families back home that we need to be clean. If we become a clean island, we stand a better chance for marketing our economy. A second thing is what's known as strategic planning, and that goes beyond partisan politics. That transcends the 4-year term of government. And what it means is all departments, whether it's the health department, the environmental department, fisheries, forestry, all come together to develop a plan that transcends the time in office that a prime minister or a permanent secretary or some other elected official remains in power. One of the beautiful things about the US is its check and balance system. Part of that check and balance system is a lot of the decision making rests outside of the political system, right? It's done by the civil service. The federal civil service does a lot of the day-to-day operations and make plans that transcends the power of the political system. And so if we can evolve that in Grenada, we stand a better chance for growing our country into becoming sustainable and environmentally friendly. A third piece is actually you need money, and you need resources, you need people to actually put pedal to the metal and get some work done. And I think all of us in diaspora here can contribute to that, myself included. And so, you know, when I was in Grenada in 2000, I had brief meetings with the Prime Minister's office. And part of my reason for coming here is to start thinking about how better I can contribute to helping Grenada plan strategically for its environmental resources. The German GIZ is now pouring lots of money, over $19 million over the last year, to develop efforts for better sustainable management of resources. That's great. Right now, it seems like a lot of the effort rests on doing what I refer to as triage, which the medical folks will say, is you try to treat the symptoms rather than the problem. So, for example, putting up an MPA alone in one small part of Grenada won't solve the problem. We got to think bigger than just a simple MPA. What happens on land affects what happens in the ocean. So you got to have a coastal zone management system. You got to have housing regulation that guide the people when they're developing to put up silt fences to prevent dirt from washing out into the ocean and things like that. And that comes with sustainable planning. So there are lots of things that could be done in the short term without too much hard financial investments to help maintain the environment so that we can all be, us and our families can be well. One other point I'd like to make before I end is, you know, I mentioned what happens on land affects what happens in the water. One of the things that really nags me is, you know, Grenada gets a lot of rain. It's one of the wettest islands in the Eastern Caribbean. And you guys know that, you know, the road workers, they clear the road, you know, once or twice a year. And they cut the bush right down to the soil. And that's just such a bad practice. Because what you do is you expose the soil to all the rain and it gets washed down into the ocean. And I took the time to drive around the island, and almost every gut and river had a huge plume of dirt, brown, dirty water extending from the shore out into the near zone. And imagine, you know, for our entire history, that's been happening. And so a simple change in, you know, leaving at least 2 inches of grass on the soil, even on the farms and on the road, would make a huge difference in the amount of soil that washes down into the ocean. So I really beseech each and one of you, every time you talk to your family and you talk about environmental, you care about the environment, you want to go to Grenadians and have a nice day on the beach. Talk about, let's keep the beaches clean, let's leave some grass on the ground to help keep that soil in place. And that's going to go a long way in making a difference. And then we can have a pure Grenada. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeffrey. Very stimulating. Just food for thought. We want to acknowledge the presence of our Deputy Prime Minister, Honorable Eldon Nimrod, United Nations Ambassador, Mr. Dennis Entwine, Ambassador for Humanitarian and Diaspora Affairs, Mr. Derek James. I believe we've just walked through and just want to acknowledge you. All right. There's a saying that we save the best for last. How many of you have heard that before? Let me see your hand. You've heard about healthcare, and then we talked a bit about the environment. And our last panelist, remember, let me just say this before I introduce our last panelist. Remember, you have index cards on the table. If you need more, just lift your hand and we'll get some to you. If you've filled out yours already and you want to pass it on, you can do so as well. Please make note on any question you would like to ask. It's optional if you want to put your name. So Nicholas Earl Brathwaite is a founding partner of Riverwood Capital, which is a private equity firm in California. So Nicholas has spent over 25 years developing and evaluating technology. You will see that he served as a chief technology officer at Flextronics. He's very innovative in his drive to move the company into product development, and he oversaw the launch and growth of several of Flextronics' largest business units. Let me just say this, in addition, previous to that, he was a founding member of NCHIP, responsible for development of the industry-leading advanced multi-chip module assembly process. And more recently at Riverwood, Mr. Nicholas served as the interim CEO for Aptina Imaging from February to August 2007 to 2008. He's authored more than 50 national and international publications. With his wife Janice, they are founders of PETNA Foundation, which supports a number of charitable initiatives in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit-Martinique, and also here in the United States. He earned his Master of Science degree in Polymer Science Engineering from the University of Waterloo, Canada, and a BSc or Bachelor of Science with honors degree in Applied Chemistry from McMaster University in Canada. He attended the, you see there's no, only GBSS, we have PBC as well. He attended Presentation Brothers College and grew up in the Villa in St. George's. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Nicholas Earl Brathwaite to the podium.
First of all, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to celebrate the 41st Independence with you. It's actually my first Independence celebration with Grenadians in many, many years. I live in California. We don't have that many Grenadians there. And I flew all the way over here just for this. Initially, when Tony asked me, Tony, who I grew up with in the Villa, asked me to come and be part of this, I was actually going to be on my way to Israel, and I said, no problem, I'll stop off and participate and then continue my trip. But last week when things started stirring up a little bit in the Middle East, I got a little scared and decided I wasn't going to go to Israel. So I called Tony and said, I don't think I can come because I'm not going to Israel anymore. And he said, a promise is a promise. So I'm here. I came in last night. I got here about 10:30, and I have a 5 o'clock flight back to California tonight because even though I'm not going to Israel, on Wednesday morning I have to fly out to India, which is a worse trip because I'm going to India for one day and flying back again for meetings I have back in California. But it's truly a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to see so many people I haven't seen in many years. You know, growing up in the Villa, I was an honorary wharf boy, so to see all the guys in the carronage, really cool. Guys I haven't seen in a long time. And I saw my friend Janice Griffith. I think I last saw Janice in Barbados probably in the 1980s or something. So it's really nice to see all of you guys. And I saw my friend Derek James walk in a little while ago. I promise I'm not going to take a lot of time. I wasn't even expecting to talk. I wasn't sure what the format was. You know, I left Grenada a long time ago. And even though I grew up, I would say I consider myself a Caribbean person. Growing up throughout the Caribbean, I went to high school in 3 different countries, in Grenada, Barbados, and Guyana. But I love Grenada, and I've spent most of my adult life trying to figure out how I can give back to Grenada, because I recognize that everything I have and everything I've accomplished, the foundation started in Grenada. It started with my roots. I was born in Carriacou, and I highlight that a lot, even though I grew up in Grenada. I left Carriacou, I was a toddler. But the reason I highlight it a lot is I still remember growing up in Grenada sometimes when people would tease me about being a kayak. And the reason I emphasize that is because I want people from Carriacou to know that it's okay to be from Carriacou. It's the same reason that everybody in Silicon Valley know I'm from Grenada. I was once asked why I still have an accent, since I left Grenada over 40 years ago, and I said, nobody asks an American why they still have an accent. I have an accent because I'm proud of my root. I'm proud of who I am, and I am not going to change my accent to be accepted, because if you can't accept me as a Grenadian, I don't want you to accept me. My involvement in Grenada is focused primarily on the youth, because with all due respect to us older folks, I do not believe that we have the ability to transform the country the way we should. We had our time, we screwed it up. And for those of us who are 50 years old or more, if the average lifespan is in the mid-70s, it really means we only have about 200 and something more months left to live. So if over the last 50 years we haven't done enough, I doubt we're going to do much more for the last 200 months that we have to live. So it is time for us to focus on the youth who can truly make a difference. You know, it's been 41 years since independence, and we've made progress. And anybody who says we haven't made progress is not speaking the truth. We've made progress. We've made some good progress, but we've not made enough progress. At least 2 people have mentioned Singapore before. I've had a lot of extensive dealing in Singapore. I started 2 companies but I was part of Flextronics, which was headquartered in Singapore, and Aptina was headquartered in Singapore, and I spent a lot of time there dealing with the government and others, and studying the history. And this is a country, 41 years after independence, had made way more progress than most other countries. And even though we've made progress, the truth is that we've also fallen behind because others have made progress faster. So if you look at us on a relative scale, we have actually fallen behind. And it's time for us to change that. And to change that, there are some things that have to happen. The first, with no disrespect, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, but we cannot continue to depend on politicians and governments. They have a role to play, and it's a very important one. But progress is not dependent on governments and politicians alone. Number 2, time to stop talking and start doing. We talk a lot. And, you know, we talk with a lot of bravado. But when the call comes out for action, many of us step back and wait for somebody else. We rather be on the sideline cheering on somebody rather than getting into the game. And it's time to get into the game. If you're serious about making a difference, we have to get into the game. And everything that I've tried to do it in such a way to set an example to say, we can get involved and you don't have to depend on others. Now, in working with the youth, I believe we have to focus on education. And I think education is more than just giving scholarships. We've given scholarships, and I'm proud of the scholarships we've given. But I've come to the conclusion that it's not enough. We have to transform the learning and teaching organizations within the country. We have some good schools. I am not suggesting by any means that we don't have some good schools. I am the product of a Grenadian education. I still say that the best teacher I've ever had in my life was Teacher Ella. who taught me in elementary school. Some of you went to Westmoreland. She teaches there now. I think she might be retired by now. I'm not sure. And I've been taught by people who were Nobel Prize, at least considered for Nobel Prize awards. But this lady was more than a teacher. She taught me self-confidence. By the time I went to PBC, I felt I could accomplish anything. And by the time I left Grenada and went outside of Grenada, I knew that I could accomplish anything. And when you work in a place like Silicon Valley, the reason Silicon Valley cannot be duplicated, and don't let anybody fool you by people saying we create the next Silicon Valley, it's not possible. First of all, any place you have the brightest people in the world working on some of the most advanced things in the world, it creates a completely different environment. You cannot create that in a homogeneous type environment. You go to Silicon Valley, everybody almost looks like an immigrant, because they are. Because we've been able to get the best and brightest from everywhere in the world to come there. And let me tell you something, if you don't have self-confidence, don't even bother coming. Because everybody scrutinizes everything you do, and everybody tells you everything you do may not work. And you have to have a lot of self-confidence, and that to me came from Grenada. And it came from the kinds of teachers, the parents I had, and the people around me. Even growing up in Grenada, the people around me, like the guys on the carnage, played a major role. And everybody in Grenada has the ability to do what I have been able to do. And if I can help pass some of that on, then I would have accomplished much. But we have to improve not just the quality of education and making it better for everybody, but we also have to make sure that our students can get into some of the top universities in the world. I remember when I was growing up, even though we didn't have a lot of people who got to university, probably my parents and your parents' generation, but some of them went to really good schools, Cambridge University in London and places like that, and Oxford. We don't see a lot of Grenadians going to some of those schools these days, and we have to make sure we also make it possible for our students to get into some of these top schools and then get back home and make a difference back home. So I think we need to start investing in the youth and investing to impact the personal lives of these young people so that they can make a difference in their communities and in the island. We are not going to be, those of us in diaspora, we are not going to be able to solve all of the problems. The country needs us, and we need to get involved, but we need to work with the young people back home, and hopefully we can all do that, and if we do that, I think we'll make a difference. Thank you very much, and again, thanks for the invitation. Appreciate being here.
Thank you so much.
My name is Sheila Johnson from Lafayette, St. Andrews, Grenada. I had the experience last July of being in the hospital with my brother. The lab was drawn, given to me, and told me to take it to St. Augustine. They are suspecting a heart attack. And here am I, with the blood in my hand, trying to figure out the best way to get to St. Augustine. And they want that result back by 4 o'clock in order to get the patient to ICU.
So I'm sorry. So your question is directed to who? What's your question?
So the question is, how can we improve on that situation?
Okay. Any one of the panelists further question? And there are some mics right there.
We know we have to pay for the blood to be run, but how can we set up a system that we pay at the hospital, and with all the computers around, they fax that information to the lab. You have a runner to take the blood, and the family members pay the cost. Because the blood, by the time you take it, and you have to walk your way to the coronage, or worst of all, to get up to St. Augustine, a lot of time is being wasted. The blood is breaking down in the meantime. So we need to improve that system. So I'm asking, if somebody could come up with an idea to better serve people.
I will attempt to answer the question in a sensible way and not a necessarily critical way. I worked in Grenada in 1979, and I had an opportunity to go through firsthand what the systems were like and the deficiencies that existed at the time. And my sense is that the deficiencies that existed then, some of them still exist today. And we're talking, what, 30-something years later, 35 years later? Which speaks to Nicholas Braffitt's point that we have fallen back, we have fallen behind in some aspects of our lives in Grenada. But to me, it's not a difficult problem to solve. The lab should provide, in a hospital, a lab should provide services 24/7. First step. Any lab that exists in a hospital must provide services on a 24/7 basis. And if that is not happening, then it should change, and it should change immediately. Secondly, if for whatever reasons something goes wrong with the lab, and that can happen, the machines may not function, or reagents may be in short supply, whatever the technical reason or the operational reason or the logistical reason, then there should also be an arrangement to provide emergency services. And whether that means getting the samples or the specimens to another lab, St. Augustine or wherever, that should be done on a contractual basis. And so you shouldn't have to be taking blood for your brother to St. Augustine. That sounds like something from the last century.
The first question here, is there an organization of Grenadian doctors here in the US who can work with the medical team in Grenada, with the medical teams in Grenada?
Well, I'm not sure there's an actual organization, but individual physicians, Grenadian physicians here in the US have expressed interest in doing so. So I don't think that would be a problem at all.
With forming one?
I beg your pardon?
With forming such an organization?
No, yeah, it may not even be necessary, because if you just developed a database of people by availability and specialty, and just call on that database as needed, you probably don't even need an organization. It depends on what you're asking for.
And he also wanted to know if his round trip will be funded to Grenada if he volunteers for the summer.
Well, I think that speaks to the question, seriously, of volunteering. You volunteer because it's the right thing to do. You don't volunteer to get something out of it, on the side you get a trick or something. No, this is a serious thing. Because again, sometimes people get upset if they bring things to Grenada as some sort of material assistance, but they also mix in things for themselves, and then it becomes a confusion and all of that. If you're doing something, you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. It's nice to be thanked. You don't need thanks. It is nice, I'm going to say that. But you bless whatever it is, you do it, and you let it go.
Okay, the next question, he wants to know how, this person wants to know how they can get involved.
In what?
In helping Grenada. Yeah. He said that you pointed out many of the shortcomings, and he wanted to know how they can get involved in changing the situation in Grenada.
So, I just asked Nicholas Braffitt here about his organization. So, I think one of the first ways to start is to use information you heard here today. One of the organizations you heard about is PETA. And they have a website. You want to talk about that website?
Well, I don't necessarily want to talk directly with PEDNA, but to me, if you want to get involved in helping Grenada, there are many vehicles for doing so. I actually think the problem is not how to get involved. There are lots of Grenadian organizations that people can tie into their local communities back home. If you're from Grenada, for example, there are villages that you can get directly involved in helping, or schools or others. I do believe, however, that the support to Grenada is too disjointed. There are too many organizations that are not working together, too many people who have their own initiatives and their own agendas, and as a result of that, we're not making as big a difference as we could. If we all get together and pick a few initiatives and all work towards the same initiatives, we'll actually make a bigger impact on the island. You know, if you want to send some money back home, for example, I think it's okay sending $20 or whatever, but understand that that's not going to necessarily make a big impact. It's going to help somebody, it's going to help a family, and that's good. I am not suggesting we shouldn't do that. But if you want to make a difference, let's send $1 million back home. And let's go pick an initiative and let's go make a difference. And we can do that. But the only way we're going to do that is if we all team up together. So this organization is trying to do something in telemedicine, and I know they had a function last year, and I heard they raised $2,000. I don't know how you feel about that, but quite frankly, I don't feel that good about that. I'm sitting there saying $2,000, man. Like, let's go get $20,000 or $30,000 and make a difference. But we all have to team up to do that. If we all send $2,000 back, it's good. Again, I'm not trying to say we shouldn't do that, but think about if we all took our $2,000 and put it together and work on a single initiative, think about the impact we could make by doing that.
Mr. Bonaparte, I think you should address this question. It falls right in line with your last comment. The question says, you said we cannot depend on politicians and government to transform and grow Grenada's economy. If so, what are the roles of politicians and government?
I think the person put a little bit more words in my mouth than I said. I did say you can't depend on politicians and government for everything, but I didn't say not for anything, not for economic development. I personally believe that governments have a very important role, which is to set the environment, the framework, to put the right infrastructure in place. Those are very important things. In no way am I trying to say that the government and politicians don't have a very important role. But if we think that every transformative initiative has to go through the government, I think we're never going to get anywhere. First of all, there is no government in the world that I know, maybe with the exception of Singapore, who have demonstrated that governments can run transformative initiatives. That's not just a Grenada thing. In the US, governments can't run transformative initiatives. So if you truly want to transform Grenada, it needs the government to set up the environment, the infrastructure, the systems, but it will take individuals to make the difference. Those of us here and others back home. So please do not misrepresent what I said by thinking that I'm saying governments don't have an important role. They have a very important role. But governments generally don't drive some of these things. If you want to set up a business in Grenada and you have to go through a government to do so, if you have to depend on the government for subsidies, if you have to do all of these things, if you have to depend on somebody in the government liking you, you don't have a business to set up.
Is there any program in Grenada right now that is implementing sustainable development for agriculture?
I can't speak specifically to that. I know the traditional organizations like the Cocoa Board and other agricultural-based organizations are doing their best. The Market County Board, I know they're trying to open up markets for a lot of Grenada's agricultural products. The Fisheries Division and the Ministry of Fisheries, I think they're doing a very decent job at marketing. You know, grade 1 tunas in the Far East, where they raise a lot of, they're economically valuable. So there are those traditional institutions, but piggybacking on what Nicholas Brathwaite said, you know, those initiatives are not necessarily going to help Grenada develop alone. We need people. I think the Grenadian population, those of us abroad as well as those of us at home, we have a very important responsibility in taking personal responsibility for our own development and pushing those initiatives forward. whether it's investing, whether it's protecting the environment, whether it's education, whether it's getting our kids to learn and be smart. We all have to contribute to that. So I think there are organizations that are promoting sustainable agriculture with international aid, but that alone won't solve our problems.
Any comments on the use of herbicides, PVC pipes, and the random placement of cell towers in Grenada?
So PVC has, a lot of the things, cell towers, PVCs, and what's the other one?
Herbicides and pesticides.
Herbicides. Yeah, those things have, they have critical effects on overall population health. And in a way, they're sort of a necessary evil because we like the positive, things they give us, but it comes at a cost. As Dr. Purcell said, nothing comes free. Their current placement, I don't know much about where they're located or what information goes into determining where they're located or how they're used. In more developed countries, there are strong organizations that sort of guide those, that guide the placement and regulate the use of those products. In the Caribbean, at home, at large, we need some of that, and hopefully, as governments mature, they can put in those regulatory agencies to help guide the placement of those products.
This was a great program. It is great information, but we have more people here who have 480 months to live than young people. So I'm saying, how do we dispense all this great information to the next generation?
Thank you, sir. A wonderful question.
First of all, I said 200 or something, man. So it's about half of what you're thinking, so we need to move faster. I don't know that I have the answer to your question, but certainly I think forums like this are very important, but we need to also find a way to get the younger people to attend these types of things. And to do that, we need to organize them differently. We need to reach the younger people. We still tend to organize these things around the things that we like, the foods that we like, the music that we like, and all of this. If you're going to reach the young people, we're going to have to start organizing some stuff around the things that they like.
Yeah, I'd like to add one point to that. I think another way is what Nicholas Brackett said earlier during his 10-minute speech at the podium. Linking back to organizations at home, especially the school system. Education. And if we can hook up with the secondary schools or NGOs that are working with the local youth to help pass that information, whether it's environmental related or business ideas for development, that's another conduit to getting that upcoming generation to care more and invest in itself.
To support what Nicholas Brackett said, I remember in 1976, I think it was, when the SDU was first started in Grenada. We at UWI, because of our own chauvinistic prejudices, opposed the school. However, as it turned out, years later, what we're finding is that investment was a transformative event in the life of Grenada. There's no question about that in my mind. That event, and you know what? It was done by Eric Gary, a person who was criticized by so many people. I never supported Eric Gary as a young man growing up in Grenada because where we were ideologically, Gary was nowhere close to that. But as in my post-menopausal state, I can see what he has done, and he has really done quite a bit as you look back. No. But to support what Brackett said, listen, there's too much dependence on government initiative for development. Government plays a role, There's a policy role the government plays, there's a regulatory role the government plays. They should be in charge of infrastructure, certain aspects of national security, etc. But the actual engine for development cannot be driven by the government. We have to look towards private-public partnership, and we have to look to all those initiatives. Because 41 years after independence, where have we gone? We have made that amount of progress. So we really need to be looking at different strategies to change the paradigm. As Einstein said, if you want a different result, you keep doing the same thing.
Now, you have an organization here, as you've seen, who are interested not in terms of getting any accolades, but they do the work. A lot of the people here, who you don't see them on stage, but they do a lot of the background work. GRENCAP is a charitable organization, and that would mean it's a 501c3, and that means that your contribution to this organization is tax deductible. So, I know you may give to other things, and of course I do as well, but just coming here today, purchasing a ticket will go a little bit, but we also solicited from you a contribution that you will get information back that you can write off of your taxes as well. So that's another way in which you can give. It's tax deductible, and you can deduct it at the end of the year.